Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be reviewing 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I buddy read this with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and I think it's safe to say that we spurred each other on, especially when it became a frustrating read. So thanks a lot, Sandy. She was a fantastic buddy reader. Hopefully we'll buddy read something again. This book is predominantly about two characters. Aomame is a person who works for a dowager in which they target men who have been, to say mean is diminutive, like they have hurt women to high degrees. They've ruined their lives. They've been sexually assaulted or other horrific things to other women. And Aomame has developed a special implement basically in which to kill these men, targeting them. Then on her off days she is drawn very specifically to sexual encounters with generally older men in order to, I don't know, vent, unwind, and we eventually learn this is tied to like a traumatic cyclical thing that occurs in her life to her past. We also have a character named Tango who is an aspiring writer. He's known to be quite good. He's submitted pieces in which they have ranked pretty highly in various contests, I think short story stuff, but not won yet, and he's done this as a pen name, just sort of working hard to garner his skills and feedback without having to put his name to a piece of writing yet. He's approached somewhat in the shadows by a publisher with a very specific story, Air Chrysalis, in which he has to, well, he doesn't have to, but he's tasked with rewriting this story and giving it a sort of competency that the initial one does not. Fuka Eri is the original artist, writer, author who has penned this at a young age. I believe she's 17. And so they're looking to flesh out the story while keeping the bones of it, while making it like a very serious, high literary piece of art is how it is generally explained. Eventually, both characters are drawn to the idea that the world that they're living in is irrevocably altered as they interact with fictional components. Although in Aomame's, the very first chapter, she is in a cab, she's waiting, she's really pissed off, and she decides to literally leave the trails, the tracks, the general world behind by leaving via a service entrance on the highway in order to get to her destination so she doesn't have to wait. And the cab driver is expressly saying, like, if you do this, you'll no longer be within the bounds, the confines of the real world. And she soon finds herself in a different world, ostensibly. There are two moons, other things have been changed subtly, and she's trying to figure out if it's her memory, if it's the world itself. Something odd is happening. She's trying to figure it out. On Tango's side, as he is writing this story, he becomes drawn so much to the fiction and the girl, the young woman who has drawn it, that he is starting to believe that the fiction is more real than reality, and spends all of his time writing and not really like going out and seeing friends. He has an older girlfriend who's actually like a mistress, and is fairly content living a life without connections, similar to Aomame. Eventually their paths coincide. That's sort of the main thrust of the novel. The problems that I have with it are many, so I'll just go into what I liked about it. I think this is the most highly readable Maximalist effort that I have consumed, not counting contemporary pieces of lit that are over this size. I'm thinking of literary Maximalist effort in which they're using large size to great effect and not just simply large page counts, like simply like King or lots of fantasy efforts are over 700, 800, 900 pages. This was 1148 pages or so and change, so 1150, something like that, of literary content, ostensibly. It's very readable, it's very consumable. It's very light, though, as well. So it's kind of contemporary in the fact that it isn't very evocative. It isn't doing much description. There's no meat on the bones. It's not lyrical. It's not poetic. It's easily accessible, consumable. And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to it. It's a large work that can be gotten through very easily, though there are complexities sort of hidden throughout it in a sort of like Easter egg sort of way, I think. In fact, I think a lot of people view the story arc in different ways depending on how they have interpreted specific explicit dialogue. It has a lot of show don't tell issues as well, but we'll get into that. Another aspect that I liked of it initially was that it's broken up into 3 different parts, and so I was expecting each book to be compartmentalized. This was a false hope. So don't go in thinking that you'll get 3 sort of complete novels that build on each other. It's just better to think of it as just one book that you're consuming completely. The other thing that I liked about it is that there's a surrealist aspect to it that I generally like anyway. I've sort of liked the dreamscape, dreamy feel of it. But this becomes a problem as well. So basically the number one good thing about this effort is that it is highly readable and very clear and generally consumable if you have the bandwidth to consume something and just plow through it, essentially. So it's like, as the Poptimist would say, flan of literary, where it's digestible, easy, light, not something you generally pick up but can get through, that kind of thing. So now I'm going to go into criticisms without spoilers, and then I will transition into complete spoilers as I criticize each aspect of the book that requires it be spoiled. So without spoilers, some criticisms I would say is the character work is very exceptionally light. We get a lot of the plot beats in books 1 and 2. The 3rd book is extremely slow and boring until the very end, as it, I think, attempts to build anticipation and fails to. The first part is especially effective in sort of setting the stage and doing more or less world building, except that it does somewhat expect you to know or accept Japan and the setting as our world, or modern day sort of thing, except it's more like 1984. So I don't think most people will be too familiar with it, and as such, as a sort of historical fiction contemporary piece, you won't be getting that much about society and its operations, machinations, and descriptions of the world and how people dress and stuff like that. It is solely concerned, I guess, with the character's point of view and discards the minutiae of things, except for the verisimilitude in which these identities are all mired, I would say, in their sexual identity. There is no other aspects that are gone into in its characterization, except for their identity as it relates to sexual congress with other people, and the trauma of which they have that propagates that need. So, in effect, they are extremely one-dimensional characters by the end, though they seem meaty at the beginning, because the illusion of much happening is occurring at the end of each book until you hit 3, and it becomes abundantly apparent that if you reflect on what these characters have done, they almost take turns being completely inactive individuals. And that is another critique that I have of the book. I don't like inactive characters. I don't really understand when it's done. very few authors can pull it off, and generally it seems senseless, as it does here. They spend a lot of their time thinking about breasts, penises, sex. The minutia of those types of details has gone into ad nauseum. It becomes like beating a dead horse, essentially, and it's the only verisimilitude that Murakami goes into. So I don't like when people use verisimilitude as the sort of armor of this, where they say that sexual identity is really important and not a lot of authors go into it, and so Murakami's subversive in that way. He does, but he also doesn't acknowledge any other aspects of a person's identity except for trauma. And people are more than that. they're more than just their past and the sex that they're having and how they feel about their body. Their actual relationships with other people usually involve only one other character, and so there is a glass bottle, room on fire type of vibe where you just want them to live and get out there. And I think that is some of the intent in keeping them there, but in an 1100 page book, it becomes extremely tiresome when every single character mentioned is simply sitting in one location doing very little and conversing, and generally conveying not much, because the dialogue itself is also very sloppy. It is exceptionally incompetent work in the dialogue. It is, again, very airy, very clear, yet generally shifts between being too explicit and being an info dump for the actual characters in such a way that it feels inorganic, and they're just explaining aspects of the characters' lives to each other that they should already know, and is so meant for the reader and points to incompetency, basically. Or they're being so obfuscating that you are trying to somewhat understand what it is they're trying to convey and need to hold on to the strangeness of the dream until much later in the book, where you can connect the dots. But it's like 800 pages later, and most people probably won't be able to remember that kind of stuff. So there's very, like, I would say intricate, but not really. There are details in the past that repeat into the future that telegraph what kind of story or dream-like thing this is, and insofar as there is a question as to whether or not this is a alternate reality 1Q84, which the Q is a play on the Japanese word Q, which is just 9, so it's 1984. It's a play on words type deal, and there is a big book called 1984 already, so I think this was a good English marketing scheme thing to do. I don't know if they did that in the original format or not, but I will say that it is somewhat satisfying connecting those dots across, but it does nothing to telegraph this to the reader at all. Whether in form or substance in the actual dialogue, it is up to the reader to sort of just believe that some of these nonsensical stuff that is being conveyed will sometimes pay off, and almost make a note of it, because you're probably going to be reading this book for quite some time, I think. So that's going to be a love or hate thing. I think it's generally a critique of the book, especially in a maximalist work. You want to be somewhat handholdy, but not so much that people have to assume best intentions over and over again for your work, because you're not displaying the kind of competency that a maximalist author usually produces in order to go somewhere. That's just my opinion, though. There are very grotesque things. There's sexual assault, there's sex with minors, and the verisimilitude, again, is used as armoring to cover up these problematic elements that seem very superfluous, with a kind of abstraction as to the uncanny nature of this and what these strange problematic things might say about the world being alternate or otherwise might do, except as we go on with the plot, it becomes a gotcha moment in which all of it is invalidated, essentially, in my mind. And I will go into that in the spoiler section. And so, really, it just seems like Murakami wanted to write about these things for shock value, for his own gratification, for his fans perhaps expecting a sort of fan service at this point of that kind of thing, and not for any kind of legitimate story practice that I can see. So, generally, the ending of this is extremely unsatisfactory. It is highly subjective, and basically, as near as I can tell, this book is positing that everybody has some kind of love for themselves within themselves, and if they find that aspect or that persona, that person, that element within themselves, they may be able to free themselves from a kind of prison. And yet, because of the subjectivity at the end of the thing, the idea is that there's a coda to that, which is maybe you could, and that's not interesting. There's no stand taken, there's no communication taken, there's no effective plotting, there's no effective pacing, there's really nothing behind this book except this sort of airy, readable prose. There's no resolution to a very specific character's plot that is one of the largest, I would say, side characters in the book. Then a different character gets a resolution that makes little to no sense and also has nothing substantive to say. So perhaps in one way, he's saying nothing matters, even though there's this through line with Aomame and Tango, and a sort of love of self and traumatic through line drawing these people together with a, albeit kind of love story happening. But then again, it's all invalidated because it could all mean absolutely nothing at the end anyway. So it's very adolescent, immature, edgelordy in some ways with how the horror elements and the sexual content is handled. He cannot write women worth a damn. This is my third Murakami, and he just can't write women. He just shouldn't write women. It's not good. He's not good at it. But he's, this is at least completely incompetent on that front, whereas other books have managed to say a cogent story and, been generally fine books, whereas this is not. Okay, so now I'm going into spoiler territory, so watch out. All right, so where to begin with this? Essentially, there are a bunch of different things that Tango communicates about his past, namely how his mother was killed. There's very specific things about his father being a NHS knocker, I think it's called. Somebody who goes around and knocks on people's doors to collect fees for the television signal that they accrue. It's a job that he used to do when he was a kid. This is a job he more or less hated, and he projects that hate onto his father. Later on in the book, Aomame, for 3/4 of the third book, is sitting at home reading Proust, and we don't even get information about that experience at all. She's just reading it for no apparent reason. It seems to be kind of like a slight dig against Proust, because it says that she would never read it unless it was a case where she was held up for a long time in one location, never doing anything. So it telegraphs to the reader that she's not going to be doing anything, and then proceeds to do it in kind of a, again, adolescent kind of way, I think. But anyway, she is proceeded to be terrorized by a knocker, and I think that is a literal character, in the sense that Tango has projected his father into his story, knocking on these doors, kind of intruding on the narrative in a Inception type of way, where his subconscious is manifesting all of these characters to one degree or another, and they represent either the good or the light within him. Aomame is the love within him, his childhood, his innocence, that kind of stuff. And she is galvanized at the end to go and try to help Tango. And then, of course, when they run away, he is told not to bring the manuscript for the new book that he has been writing. He brings it anyway, and that ostensibly means that rather than them having Tango wake up from this dream that we don't even know why he's in the first place, or at least I couldn't figure it out, he may have pulled himself deeper into his subconscious because of that writing. So it's very Inception-y to me. And so all of the characters are projections, essentially, and there's a character that is murdered just as his mother was ostensibly murdered, we learn. And there's a number of different explicit verbalizations of the world being verbalizing internalizations that Tango has never articulated elsewhere. And so I can't think of any explanation that is satisfactory except for this is a dream or a subconscious thing that he has entered. Maybe he's injured, maybe he's dying, and this is like an abstraction of him trying to wake up, stay on to hope, live again, something like that. I don't know. It would be nice if we knew why he was unconscious at all, but the obfuscation is that it's merely an alternate reality that Aomame and he had entered and are attempting to escape to the real world. And so there is a great deal of there's like a head nod essentially in the text saying that maybe they did not get out. And so again, my critique is that it manages to say nothing then, right? And furthermore, it invalidates all of the character work that is done. If everybody is an abstraction, if everybody is a projection of Tango, none of them actually matter. And the character work is reflective only of Tango himself. And therefore, is very, it's 1,150 pages about the nature of one man, but not really, because it's a subconscious. How are we able to judge Tango in such a space that we really know nothing about, or very little about subconscious, dreaming, injured minds, injured bodies, things like that. And so that's why Aomame feels like a very masculine person in terms of her characterization, in terms of her wants and needs being very sexual, in terms of her being characterized solely by trauma and stuff like that. Because Aomame, the only true memory I think Tango has is this childhood memory in which they met in a class, they held hands. For some reason, he got off on it, literally, and ejaculated, and then they never saw each other again. And so he's extrapolated everything about Aomame from there. Then there's other characters that are, again, cast as people, where they're on the side or not. And somebody seems to be trying to get Tango to wake up, as far as I've sort of got. I would have probably delved deeper into the text had I actually cared more, and it wasn't such a slog. So maybe there is stuff that I'm missing. However, I think the competency of the author illustrated that it's not a sort of book where the author is communicating that they have this story, that they've got you, that if you come along, you're going to be able to get something substantive out of it. And so you sort of make it just an airy read, basically. And maybe that's part of the obfuscation, maybe that's part of the gotcha moment, the joke that he's trying to play on the reader, but to me, it just feels very disrespectful. And again, the core conceit of it being a subliminal place invalidates all of the character work. It invalidates the need for like these perversions, basically, of Tango, and kind of allow the adolescent urge to go into all these sexual exploits, these little men being birthed out of goats in horrific moments, and sex crimes, sex acts, and all this kind of stuff. It's just all sort of meaningless to me. It's all pointless. It's all meaningless. It's all inept to me. So this is by far the most, as I say many times in this video, inept work of maximalist fiction I've ever picked up. All of his other works are better than this, so I don't know why it's his magnum opus. Perhaps because it's so obfuscationally constructed, that people want to see a lot of meaning in them having finished a large book, which happens with maximalism. People get so elated that they finished a huge work that they just project a lot of love or attention and whatnot onto the book and try to get more out of it than is actually there. I think it's just, yeah, not worth anybody's time. If you're gonna pick up a Murakami, pick up anything else as far as I'm concerned. I haven't read a whole bunch of them. I've only read Hardboiled Wonderland and Norwegian Wood. Both are armored with verisimilitude, in which young boys accrue women in a harem-like style in which they're always horny, and all the women somehow want to get with this guy with no personality. He's bland, just like Tango. It seems to be a thing with Murakami. But at least those books tell a story, and this doesn't really do that, especially in terms of pacing, especially in terms of storycraft at a maximalist level. So that's my review of 1Q84. Thank God I got it from the library, although I did buy a $5 copy on Audible, so I was doing both and consuming it quite quickly, thankfully. And I will see you next video. Bye-bye.